When we talk about ancient Indian empires, there are two empires which come to our mind. The first is the Mauryan Empire and the second is the Gupta Empire. Now, because these two empires are fairly well known, we find that there are certain comparisons that are made comparing these two empires. And particularly, I will here in this video talk about the comparison of the territories of these two empires. We find that the Mauryan Empire is considerably larger than the Gupta Empire. So why that is the case? So in this video, we will discuss this question. Now, before comparing the reasons why the Gupta Empire was considerably smaller than the Mauryan Empire, let's just first look at the territories which these two empires controlled. In the Mauryan case, we find that the Mauryan Empire reached its peak during the time of Ashoka. In this period, the Mauryan Empire controlled large chunk of territory in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, and most of the Indian subcontinent barring parts of northeast and the deep south were under the control of the Mauryas. Now, if we were to look at the Gupta Empire, we find that the Gupta Empire reached its peak during the reign of Kumargupta. During this time, the Gupta Empire controlled most of the northern India, but the region of northwest and territories south of the Narmada were not under the control of the Guptas. So if we were to compare these two empires, we find that the Gupta Empire was considerably smaller than the Mauryan Empire. The region of northwest and the region of southern India, which were part of the Mauryan Empire, were not controlled by the Guptas. So what were the reasons behind it? To begin with, we find that the start of these two empires were considerably different. In the Mauryan case, we find that Chandragupta Maurya had inherited most of the territories of the Nandas. The territories which the Nandas controlled was quite significant. And if we compare this territory to the Gupta Empire at the start, we find that there is a considerable difference. When the Gupta started, they were a small kingdom in eastern India. So here we can clearly see that even at the start of the two empires, the Mauryans had a considerable advantage. If we analyze the two regions of northwest India and southern India, which the Mauryans controlled and the Guptas did not, we find that there were several reasons behind it. So let's take southern India. Here we find that at the time of the Mauryan expansion, the situation was completely different from the time of the Guptas. In the Mauryan case, at this time, southern India, particularly in the Deccan case, we find there were no significant kingdoms. By kingdom, I mean there were no significant state that could utilize the resource of this region and oppose the Mauryan expansion. Instead, from the archaeological evidence, we find that at this time, in Deccan particularly, there were small chieftains who controlled small localities. So there was not a single unified state or a kingdom that could oppose the Mauryan expansion. But this was not the case in the Gupta period. From Prayag Prashasti of Samudragupta, we learn that Samudragupta has led an expedition in southern India. In this Prashasti, we also find that the names of southern kings which Samudragupta had encountered is also mentioned. Now here lies the main difference. In the Gupta case, we find that in Deccan there were kingdoms that had originated. But in the Mauryan case, this was not the case. We can also see the example of the Vakatkas that had established themselves in Deccan. So what we see here is that in the Gupta case, there were kingdoms in Deccan and southern India as a whole that could oppose the Gupta expansion. This sense of opposition from southern kings is also the main reason why Samudragupta did not establish his rule over the territories which he had subjugated during the southern expedition of his. Samudragupta knew that without pouring in considerable amount of resources, he could not maintain the direct Gupta rule in this region. So because of this, what he did was he just accepted the submission of the defeated southern kings. He did not try to establish establish his rule over this region. Now, this problem which Samudragupta had to face in this attempt to conquer southern India was not even there during the time of the Mauryas. In the Mauryan case, there were no kingdoms that could oppose the Mauryan expansion. But after 500 years, when Samudragupta tried to expand in this region, there were kingdoms that could oppose the Gupta expansion. So that was why we see that the Mauryans were able to expand in southern India, whereas the Guptas did not. Now, if we move to northwest, here the story is somewhat different. The Mauryan conquest of northwest happened during the time of Chandragupta Maurya. Before this conquest, Chandragupta Maurya had control over large chunk of territories in the north and central India, and these territories provided considerable amount of resources to the Mauryas for the conquest of the northwest. But this was not the case with the Guptas. The major expansion of the Gupta Empire happened during the time of Samudragupta. We find that at the start, the Guptas only controlled a small territory in eastern UP. By the time Samudragupta's reign ended, the Gupta territory had considerably expanded. Now, if the Guptas wanted to conquer the northwest, it could happen in the reign of the next ruler, Chandragupta II. But for Chandragupta, his priority was the conquest of western India, not the northwest. This was because of the lucrative trade of western India. So, in the reign of Chandragupta II, the conquest of western India started, and this conquest was completed by Kumargupta. So that is why we see that after Samudragupta, both Chandragupta II and Kumargupta focused all their attention in the conquest of western India, not the northwest. Another reason why this conquest of northwest did not happen was because of the presence of Huns. By the time of 318 AD, Huns had already conquered the region of Gandhar, and if the Guptas wanted to conquer this region, they had to deploy considerable amount of military might to defeat the Huns. Now suppose you are Chandragupta II, you have two options. First, you can conquer western India that could provide you access to the lucrative sea trade. The second option is the conquest of northwest. This conquest could provide you with access to large supply of horses, which can be used for further expansion of the Gupta Empire. We know what Chandragupta II chose. Chandragupta II chose to conquer the region of western India. In the northwest, what he did was he led an expedition to gain access to the supply of horses, but he did not conquer this region. That is because he knew that in order to maintain rule over this region, he had to pour in significant amount of resources. Even if he was to conquer the region of Gandhar, the region of Bactria would still not be in his control, and the region of Bactria was the core of the Kidrite Huns. So that is why Chandragupta II chose to conquer western India, and this western conquest was completed by Kumargupta. In the reign of Kumargupta, we see that the Huns in the northwest had consolidated their power, and it was no easy task to conquer these Huns in this region. And even Skandagupta, who managed to defeat the Hunnic invasion, was not able to destroy the Huns from their base in the northwest. And after Skandagupta, the Gupta Empire had started to decline. So there was no chance to conquer the northwest. So this was the reason why the Guptas were not able to conquer the region of northwest. Now, if you want to know about the Gupta history and the Mauryan history, please watch these two playlists. Thank you for watching.